Welcome everyone to the Return of the Young Writers vlog. I've changed things up a bit on the set because that table is huge and I'm really far away when I was filming, and so we're going to do the exact opposite of that and be a little bit too close. For the next couple of weeks we're going to be talking about a couple vague and abstract ideas around storytelling. These are not necessarily rules for writing so much as they're particular ways of viewing storytelling, certain ways of interpreting works and ways to interact with them, both as a reader and as a writer. We're going to start this off with a talk on the death of the author. Now, I don't mean about authors literally dying. We're not going to talk about anything quite so morbid or moribund. This is instead a conversation about the methods that you use to analyze written works. Among these tools are a set of out-of-universe analyses, or extra-diegetic analyses, or Doyleist analyses, named after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes series. These are ways of analyzing a work that look at real-world reasons to explain the things that happen inside of them. They involve speculating on the ways you're supposed to interpret a work based on the life of the creator, their past works, their history, and then saying, this piece of writing is this way because the author was trying to make this or that point. Now, this analysis can be actually quite useful in a lot of situations, especially when you're talking about the historical contexts of a work. Understanding the culture and society surrounding the creation and release of a piece of literature can give you some insight on the reasons why it resonated with audiences at the time. Now, this is all fine. Understanding the historical context of a work is good, but the problem comes around when you start to use these out-of-universe tools to make much more specific statements about the work. The phrase authorial intent is used a lot to justify why a certain interpretation of a work is more valid than another, and that makes a bit of sense. If there are two competing interpretations and one of them was that the author actually wanted this to be there, then I guess the discussion's over. That's the way it was supposed to be, and that's the way we're supposed to read it, right? Well, no. The death of the author is an argument that posits that whatever it is that the author intended, whether you know it or not, it doesn't actually matter. The only thing that does matter is the thing that the writer actually ended up making, the words on the page, the things that the work actually says. This is about challenging the idea that creators are the sole arbiters of what their works mean to the audience, that they're allowed to dictate how you're supposed to interpret their works, because it's absolutely not the case. The readers have an extraordinary amount of power to determine what a work means to them, and the author doesn't necessarily have the power to say, you're not allowed to interpret my work this way. See, writing is a form of communication. It's a conversation between the reader and the writer, and just like any other conversation, the speaker alone doesn't get to decide how the listener interprets their words. If there's a meaning there and the listener picks up on it, then that's fair game for the listener to see it that way. Whatever interpretations people are able to gather from a text, using the text itself to support their interpretation, is valid regardless of whether or not the creator wanted the text to be taken that way. It is, of course, important to remember that this is a concept. It's not a hard rule. It doesn't mean that all interpretations of a work are equally valid or that authors aren't allowed to comment on their own work. Rather, the point of death of the author is to distance the creator from their creation and allow the work to speak for itself. It forces you to make arguments about a work's meaning that focus on the work itself rather than the person who made it. Because it doesn't really matter what a creator intended to make when we only get to see the end product. So speculating on the intentions that an author might have had, or by using the author's words about the work as indisputable fact that this is what things mean, all these things aren't particularly useful compared to the ability we have to analyze the words that all of us share, that we all heard, that all of us experienced when we interacted with this work. A good work of literature has the capacity to stand on its own. It has the ability to defend itself and its own viewpoints. And there are plenty of interpretations and meanings that you can pull from any particular work, more so than any writer could feasibly try to put in intentionally. Now, I imagine most of us watching are writers and authors ourselves. So how do we work with this concept? We often do intentionally put deeper meanings inside of our work, and shouldn't readers put more stock in the meanings we wanted them to notice? Again, no. We don't get to decide how people interact with our work. We don't get to dictate how readers are supposed to interpret it. All we can do is try our best to make our meanings clear and hope that people pick up on them. It's also really important to understand that people are going to read deeply into the things that you write and pull out meanings that you absolutely did not intend. For the most part, this is great. It's a chance for people to interact with your work in a way that you didn't even consider, and can really spotlight the nuances of the thing that you've created if a reader can pull something from it that not even you knew was there. But on the other hand, this has the potential to be disastrous. If, say, someone decided that your work implied that genocide was A-okay or something like that. Of course, you can claim that that wasn't at all my intent, but that only gets you so far if your work can be shown to demonstrate that point. If there is a valid way of interpreting your work that demonstrates this terrible point that you didn't want your work to make, your intention isn't going to get you off scot-free on that. This is why it's important to understand that you can't rely on your own justifications, your own intentions to get the meaning across in your writing. No matter what you are writing, there will always be people that will read your work in the least favorable light. They'll look for the worst possible interpretations of your work and will hold it against you if they find something. So it's important to remember that your work is going to represent ideas and have meanings that you weren't intended, and maybe they'll be complex and controversial. And so whenever your work does start to flirt with dangerous or controversial topics, you have to be very certain that it's saying what you want it to say. You can't rely on people giving you the benefit of the doubt, because in the end, they don't know you. They don't care about your intentions when all they have is your work, and if your work is ambiguous, then they get to decide what meaning they pull from it. If your work has the ability to stand on its own legs, you want to make sure it's going to walk in the right direction when it gets released into the public. As writers, we have to recognize that our works might be used to reinforce ideas or meanings that we personally don't agree with. It's a potential that we have to recognize. It's a risk that we have to mitigate. We have to consider what meanings and ideas people can draw from our work when they're taken in their most negative light. Because we are ultimately responsible for the things that we've put into our work. Even if we didn't mean this particular interpretation to exist, we are fundamentally responsible for putting it in there, for creating a work that allowed this interpretation to flourish. Because good intentions don't absolve us of responsibility. If our work accidentally advocates violence against a public figure, we're kind of responsible for putting that in there. So Death of the Author reinforces the idea that once your work is complete and released to the public, it is fair game for anyone to talk about it. You don't get to decide that some conversations aren't worthwhile or some conversations are wrong. It is a matter of public debate and public opinion whether or not your work actually means this. And that's essentially why you should get proofreaders, why you should have people look over your work before you release it for publication, because a fresh pair of eyes will do wonders for recognizing things in your work that you might have missed, that you might have overlooked, and they can really help you identify that your work is maybe not saying what you wanted to say. And as I mentioned in the last episode, being able to say exactly what you mean is essentially the mark of a good writer. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Young Writers Vlog. If you have any questions or comments about the death of the author, leave a question down below. Join us next week when we talk about another highly abstract concept of literary discourse. Advantage of being this close, it's actually much easier for me to interact with the computer here and actually make sure that things are going well. I don't have to constantly get up and deal with and fiddle with things. Disadvantages, you can see how warm it is in this apartment right now. I'm really not sure why I decided to wear an overcoat when it's like 30 degrees in here. So that's fun. The window was supposed to be open, but as soon as I hit the record button, someone started doing yard work outside, so that's just a metaphor for life. You're trying to do a thing, and then a random stranger will do something that absolutely counterpicks your ability to do this.